Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. And this time I'm talking about the Doctor Who episode, A Town Called Mercy. I've got some mixed feelings about this episode, but overall I think it's a pretty good one. First of all, just for the fact that we're dealing with well, we actually do have at least one American actor on this show, so we're not dealing with horrible American accents on the level of what we saw with Daleks in Manhattan or Daleks in New York, whatever. I mean, for God's sakes, I'd even take Perry's quote unquote American accent over some of what we saw in those episodes. Dear God. Honestly, I think the British were getting back at us for Dick Van Dyke's Cockney accent and Mary Poppins. Okay, but let's get right into it. And as long as I'm talking about American accents, hey, did you notice who it was that was playing Isaac in this episode? Yeah, none other than Ben Browder from Stargate and Farscape. And just as long as we're talking about the guest stars this episode, Jex. Okay, Adrian Scarborough from The King's Speech. How cool is that, huh? But as much as I love Ben Browder, I think the real kicker is the fella who hold on, let me see if I can call it up here on my screen. No. Oh yeah, here it is. Garrick Hagong, whatever. He plays the Undertaker. You recognize that guy? Does he look a little familiar? It's freaking Biggs Darklighter from Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie. Awesome. And if you're puzzling over exactly who Biggs is, he's the dude with the dumb mustache who got killed by Darth Vader in his X-wing when the rebels were attacking the Death Star. Still, an actual Star Wars guy on Doctor Who. How sweet is that? But anyway, let's continue on talking about this episode. First call, the character of the gunslinger. Now, since we do talk about characterization mostly here, let's talk about him first. Well, first of all, just his visual appearances and his technology. Visually, from what I understand, he's taking some cues from Yul Brynner's cowboy in the old classic sci-fi flick Westworld. He's also with his little HUD, I guess is the best thing that I can think to call it, is obviously very reminiscent of the Terminator. But to me, well, the Gunslinger does have a good story. I just really can't take him seriously because he looks like Crichton from the cowboy episode of Red Dwarf. Seriously, he looks like Crichton. And I just cannot take Terminator Cowboy Crichton seriously. I mean, again, this is no fault of the actors or the writers. It's just he looks like Crichton. But I do like that the Gunslinger is not a straight-up villain. He's not a straight-up hero. He's a person who has been wronged, who is taking great pains, now granted part of that's his programming, to avoid hurting anybody. And he really only gets to where he's even thinking about crossing the line when he has given these people every opportunity to give him what he wants without real difficulty. He's given them multiple chances to take the easy way out. And I do like that at the end he is willing to give Jack credit for facing his past and, going out like a man, dying with honor, as he says. Now, I don't know about this whole thing of him protecting the town forever as some sort of secret little guardian angel. I mean, you got to think there's got to be somewhere else out in the galaxy where a fellow like the Gunslinger would be of much, much greater use than some little dirt town in the middle of nowhere in the United States. But, well, in a way, this is a little bit of, I don't want to exactly call it a fairy tale. Maybe a folk tale is the best best way of describing this episode. Some kind of crazy American sci-fi folktale, told and starring, with minor exceptions, a bunch of British people. Well, America is the land of immigrants, and as this episode does remind us, of second chances. And that kind of brings us to Jack. He's another character who's very interesting. He's, as he says, he isn't one thing or the other. He is neither this, simple, kind town doctor or this horrible war criminal. He is both. And the fact that he is both, as he rightly points out, really drives the Doctor up the wall. Because the Doctor has dealt with so many people who are unapologetically evil that dealing with someone like Jack, who, like him, and again, Jack points this out, has done drastic and terrible things that have cost countless lives in order to stop a terrible war. And I think that's really what really gets under the Doctor's goat. And Jack's wrong, I think, in that the Doctor doesn't know how to deal with Jack being someone who has done both great good and great evil. The Doctor himself has made a lot of very morally ambiguous choices. He has done a lot of very gray things. So I think Jack's wrong there. I think what's really getting the Doctor here is just how much of himself he sees in Jack. I mean, look at the way that the Ninth Doctor was just so tormented by what he had done in the Time War. And that has to have been exacerbated by the knowledge of some of the stuff the Seventh Doctor did when he was basically functioning as Time's champion. Now, granted, a lot of that's sort of in the Doctor Who expanded universe, and maybe a lot of people who just know the TV show aren't familiar with it. Now, sorting out what there is exactly canon is, anybody's guess at this point. But I've read a pretty decent number of those Seventh Doctor Times Champion stuff. And man, oh man, the Doctor was a real bastard. More than once in those stories. Which is honestly why I think one of the reasons why the Eighth Doctor just seemed to embrace life so much. By regenerating, he could really, truly leave all of that behind him and just get back to doing what he loved, get back to enjoying life, to enjoying being able to travel around the universe and do good. Now, I'm not too familiar with the expanded universe in relation to the Eighth Doctor, so I'm just going to leave it there, because that's the impression I walked away with from the old American TV movie. But speaking of shades of previous Doctors, the way the Doctor was driven to basically be willing to sacrifice Jack. I'm not the only one who looking at that was reminded of the 10th Doctor when he was really on the verge of becoming, as he called it, the Timelord Victorious. Which, like a lot of Doctor Who fans, I think, really probably was a big step on the path the Doctor took in some future out there towards becoming the Valyard. And this is also reminiscent of some stuff that I've talked about in my earlier Doctor Who reviews, where, and this is something that Amy points out to him, the Doctor really tends to backslide on his morality a little bit when he doesn't have companions around. As I mentioned in my other reviews, I think it was the episode 1 million BC where we really get to one of the very early stories where the Doctor is genuinely thinking about killing someone for no other reason than to save his own skin. And it's Ian Chesterton, a simple human, who points out just how morally wrong this is to the Doctor, the guy from the enlightened, advanced alien species from way out there who've been the masters of time and space forever. And yet it's still this little simple human guy who is able to behave in the more morally superior way. And as I have said previously, I think this is one of the reasons why the Doctor is so attached to Earth, so attached to the human race. Because there was a time when the Doctor was really willing to cross the line, to go down that path of being a murderer, really. And it was a human who pulled him back at the last minute. So I think that is really one of the reasons why the Doctor does constantly have companions around. And why so often his companions are young people. Of course, another reason why I think that is because the Doctor's first companion was a very young person. It was Susan, his own granddaughter. Now, maybe the Doctor was telling the truth to the preacher that the horse has some very interesting lifestyle choices going on, and that he does prefer to be called Susan. My personal theory on that is that maybe the Doctor was just screwing with the guy for a laugh and continued to talk to the horse because, one, there was exposition needed, and B, the Doctor was just enjoying his own joke a little too much. But still, I can't help but wonder, Susan. Is it a coincidence, or is she still on his mind after all these years? I mean, look at that. I mean, the Doctor did get married. He does technically once again have a family. So if that's the case, how could Susan not be on his mind? But anyway, speaking of previous continuity, as long as I'm bouncing around there, the Doctor is now apparently officially 1,200 years old. Now, it was very strongly hinted that a great deal of time had passed between the time that we saw the Doctor last and, like in towards the end of last season. So, because if I'm remembering history right, like the fourth Doctor even said that he was about 900 years old. So if this is the case, then it really means that the Doctor has been in his 11th incarnation for, well, measuring the Doctor's age is a real puzzler, but it would have to be pretty up there in terms of how long he spent in each incarnation. I'm sure, of course, that his time as the first Doctor is probably the longest, but still, if that's the case, then maybe it's not so strange to think that the Doctor might be backsliding a little bit towards his first incarnation, because it was indeed his first incarnation who was the one who was willing to kill that person to save his own skin. But, that's just an idea. So, let's talk about... Yeah, let's take a break from talking about the characters. Let's talk about Actually, no. Let's continue on talking about the characters. And since I brought her up, let's talk about Amy. Amy, apart from, really kind of getting on the Doctor's case about needing companions around, didn't really have a whole lot to do this episode. Now, granted, that sort of confrontation at the edge of town where she actually pointed a gun at the Doctor, now that was a really interesting, very dramatic scene. But, I certainly don't think any of us actually thought that Amy was going to shoot the Doctor. The Doctor certainly didn't think so. So I think Amy's role in this episode really was simply to really illustrate that point, that the Doctor does need his companions around, because they do serve as his connection to the ordinary people of not just Earth, but of the galaxy and the universe in general. The Doctor is an extremely old, very ancient, very powerful being. So it's really not so surprising that it's easy for him to disconnect, easy for him to drift away, to sort of see his power and knowledge and wisdom as a license to do whatever he wants, to dole out justice however he sees fit. I mean, we've even said this. The 10th Doctor basically said that I'm the Doctor, I'm the final authority. And we saw some of the places where the 10th Doctor started to go. So, yeah, I think that's basically the sum of Amy's role in this episode. Rory was there to just sort of help out and, leave his phone charger in Henry VIII's bedroom. Yeah, I'm just. Is it just me, or does this show just, no matter what he does, seem to always want to treat Rory as the butt of the joke? Boy, it's been a lot. It feels like a really long time since the last Centurion was out there kicking major ass, doesn't it, folks? But anyway, let's continue on talking about some of the stuff. Um, let's talk about some of the gripes that I had with this episode. The first of all, the doctor says that this town has electricity 10 years before it should. And they also say that this happens, the story is taking place 5 years after the war. Now, presumably, this being the American West, they mean the Civil War. So this would put this at 1870, give or take a few months, most likely. So I can't help but think, if, wait a minute, there's a town that is fully powered by electricity well before it should happen in real history, wouldn't people all over the country have sat up and taken notice of this? And Isaac even says that the town gets supplies from elsewhere. Being cut off like this is what is going to cause the people to starve. So if presumably the travelers and traders who come into Mercy see this, well, why aren't they telling everybody who will listen about this? Why hasn't the U.S. government sent somebody out there to find out what the heck's going on? I mean, advanced technology popping up in some small town in the middle of nowhere? People are going to notice that. Of course, on the other hand, complaining about, hey, shouldn't this have really changed history on Doctor Who is sort of like complaining, hey, it's wet when there's a hurricane rolling through town. This is just the nature of the beast. And I'm really just throwing this out there because this is stuff that was going through my mind while I was watching this episode. And speaking of stuff that was going through my mind in this episode, one complaint that I do have to genuinely lodge against this episode is that we're looking at some seriously politically correct history with this episode. Now, while race relations in the Old West are genuinely, in my book, more complicated than people tend to make it out, I hate to say it, folks, but in 1870, there's no way a town in the Old West was just going to not blink at having a black guy as the local preacher. The only black guy in town, as near as I could tell from watching this episode. I'm sorry, that's probably just not going to happen. Now, if you're gonna say that the presence of having a guy who's essentially known to be an alien would cause the townspeople to maybe rethink some of their attitudes towards this sort of thing, it certainly would give them ample good reason to be a little bit more open-minded about people from their own planet. Now, if that had been at least mentioned, I wouldn't have any problem with this. But it's just glossed over. There is no acknowledgement that in the real world that just simply would not fly in 1870. And you know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. Politically correct history is just one of those things that really bugs me, because it simply makes me feel as if the people who are making the show feel as if we can't handle the idea that people in the past had ideas that would have been unacceptable to us, but that those people were quite simply not straight up villains. They were simply people who were the products of their time. Now, that doesn't excuse that those attitudes were wrong, but think of it this way. Really, aren't we all simply the product of our time? And how would you like for people who are going to be living decades, centuries from now, to judge you? Would you like them to judge you by the standards of their society, which has ideas and technology and whatever that you and I probably can't even imagine? Or would you rather that they judged you as a person who was just trying to live your life the best way you could, in accordance with the values that you were raised and what was genuinely, realistically possible within your time and society. It's as somebody has said, and I've used this quote in my other videos more than once. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently than there. They do things differently there. Just something I think we should all keep in mind when we look at history. Another thing we should all keep in mind is that whatever judgments we make about history and the people who lived in the past, they were all just as human as you or I are. And I'd like to think that people in the past were that same shade of gray that so many of us in modern times were. But anyway, let's continue on. Oh yeah, okay, so there's this cord out in the desert where nature and animals can get at it, and if anybody tugs on it in the slightest little bit, it causes the lights in town to flicker. But apparently, judging by the way people react, the lights flickering is a strange and unusual occurrence. That makes no freaking sense at all. You know I'm splitting hairs here and pointing out stuff that is not really important to the story. But again, I share these things with you because they are things that go through my mind when I watch these episodes. Yes. One quote that I did like that came up in the episode was the concept of your justice. And the way that Jack pointed out, the way the doctor kind of said to Jack, you don't get to choose how you atone. You want to atone by coming to this little town and, being treated like a hero. Well, you know what? I gotta say, I think the doctor's kind of full of it on this one. Because really, how did the doctor choose to atone for what he did during the Time War? Well, once he, we don't know what he was doing for quite a while. He was bouncing around as the 8th and probably the 9th Doctor for quite a while on his own, having his own little Doctor adventures, doing God only knows what. But once Rose enters the picture, really, it becomes just the Doctor hanging out with attractive young ladies, bouncing around time and space, battling aliens. The thing he's always done, the thing that he likes to do the most. So really, the Doctor's way of atoning to me seems to be, angst about it, but more or less go back to living my life the way I always used to. He does that, and then the Doctor is going to condemn Jack? Seriously, the Doctor was hanging out with like Rose and Martha, and having fun, and he's going to complain that Jack just wanted, to live in a decent place and be treated with respect? Jeez, Doctor, you're really being an ass here. Speaking of stuff, it's interesting that speaking of stuff, well, there's a real enlightened kind of saying, isn't it? Hey, speaking of stuff. Oh boy. Okay. I did like that Jack did call himself a war hero. And you have to think in some bizarre, twisted way that the Time Lords might even consider the Doctor a war hero. But the Doctor certainly doesn't think of himself that way. And but getting back to stuff that doesn't make sense. Apparently the ship of Jack and the guy we see in the opening credits, both of them crashed on Earth. Now, as near as I can tell, there wasn't room in that spaceship that Jack killed himself in for 2 people. So, and they even did say ships. So, what happened that caused both ships to crash on Earth? I mean, was there were their systems connected somehow? Was there like some kind of cosmic storm? Like, why is it that 2 ships simultaneously crashed in virtually the same place at the same time? Now again, I know I'm sort of digging at details that really aren't important to the story, But again, I'm just bringing that to your attention because it occurred to me. And why was I'm looking at my notes here. When we first meet him, why was Jack in the cell to begin with? I mean, I guess you could say maybe he was there to protect him from the gunslinger, but because Isaac was there and Isaac could guard him. That was the place that Isaac could guard him most easily, I suppose. But there's also the fact that there's no escape for Jack if the gunslinger comes through the door and Isaac is not able to stop him. I mean, you can't run out of the back door of a jail cell. I did really like the backdrop of this episode. From what I've read online, this was actually filmed in Spain, a place where they filmed, I believe it was part of A Fistful of Dollars was filmed in this area. And it's all a special studio. It's basically geared up to film westerns. Now, it's kind of awesome that there's a movie studio just sort of sitting around in some part of Spain, specifically for shooting genre movies set in old-timey America. But yeah, I did like that. I just found it interesting. And I think I'm slowly losing my ability to form coherent thoughts here. So I think we need to wrap that up here. Looking at my notes, I have indeed covered everything that I wanted to talk about. And so overall, let's wrap this up. As I said, I do think this was certainly a vast improvement over some of our previous set in America stories. This definitely was very cool to see Ben Browder here. He's a real fan favorite among sci-fi fans. Definitely an interesting story, a complicated story that really reminded us of the gray aspect of the Doctor's character. Again, Amy and Rory not really utilized terribly well in this episode, but it's really not their story. We'll get to some more of that next time. But definitely an episode worth watching. As always, folks, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.